So, Dr. Gleb, it's great having you back. We chatted actually right at the kind of the beginning of the pandemic, and I was super grateful to have your insights on how COVID-19 was doing during that time and how organizations were responding to it. I just wanted to, I guess, yeah, I was like very grateful for all your insights. I was wondering if you can share a little bit about just kind of an update on how you're doing and as you've been tracking the strain and how you're seeing organizations respond right now.
Sure, happy to. Well, of course, with the vaccines, we are definitely on the way to getting the pandemic over with. Unfortunately, there are some states that are less forward on vaccines than others, especially in the South. So it's a little bit of a concern where they're slowing down and there's maybe a potential rise in cases, especially in the fall, as COVID becomes more problematic. But overall, we're definitely doing well and we're on the way to out of this crisis and to the new normal. And so that's the white paper that I sent you about returning to the office. So I think right now, when I'm talking to leaders, to executives, a lot of them have returning to the office on their minds. And that's we asked what I'm up to. That's what I'm up to. I'm up to talking with folks and helping them figure out how to return to the office. And more importantly, how to permanently change their culture, their work culture going into the future. Because there's a lot of problems, what I'm noticing with executives who want to go back to January 2020, who want to go back to those days before the pandemic. And that's a problem for a number of reasons, as you know, from what I sent to you. And we can talk about that. But that's been the biggest challenge that I've been seeing recently. Executives who really want to go with their gut, follow their intuition, trust their heart, which tells them to go back to January 2020.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of those challenges because I think for many people, they kind of want to return back to normal. Um, and I know, especially like as I chat with some of my friends who are single and like living alone at home, like they can't wait to be back in an office environment. So I totally understand that. Um, but it is very, very difficult. And I think um, as we do shift to some people being in the office and some people working remotely, how that's all going to work. How do we still work collaboratively? So can we talk a little bit about some of the challenges you're seeing, especially as you chat with all these different leaders?
Yes. So the biggest challenge that I'm seeing is leaders not actually paying attention to what employees want. Leaders focusing on what they feel good about. Leaders going with what they're comfortable with, trusting their gut, following their heart, trusting their intuitions, and so on. And there are a number of cognitive biases, mental blind spots behind that, which we can talk about. But before that, I want to talk about the data, the evidence. One of the biggest problems I'm seeing executives not really gathering evidence from their employees on what their employees want. When you look at large-scale surveys done by the Harvard Business Review, by Harris Poll, by Slack, by Microsoft, of a lot of their folks, and using data that they have available. So Slack not only does surveys, but obviously they have data on how people collaborate, Microsoft through Microsoft Teams as well. What they're finding is that despite the number of folks who do want to go back to the office, that's overwhelmingly not the case. Only a small minority of people actually want to go back to the office full time. Looking at these surveys, and the white paper that I sent to you on returning to the office has 8 large-scale surveys. And since that time, there have been a couple of others done, including one that came out last week that show the same evidence, that the surveys overwhelmingly show that somewhere maybe like a fifth of all employees want to go back to the January 2020. They want to go back to Monday, MF 9 for 5, Monday to Friday 9 to 5, that usual typical schedule. Whereas something in the range of 30 to 40% want to work full-time remotely from home. They want to continue working from home, and there are a number of reasons behind that. We can talk about that. They want to work fully remotely from home. The rest, somewhere, the remaining something like 40%, 50% want to work hybrid. So you'll see a plurality of people want a hybrid schedule, which typically means something like 1 to 3 days in the office. But they definitely don't want to do more than half time in the office. So that's what you're seeing as the range of desire. So overwhelmingly, people want to spend more time out of the office rather than in the office. So you'll see something like probably around 70% on average, 70% of their time out of the office. So, 60 to 70%, let's say it that way. And what the surveys are also showing, which is really important, is that they're ready to quit if their employer is asking them to be in the office more than they're comfortable. They're ready to find a new job. Anywhere from low 40s to high 50s, depending on the poll. The latest poll that I mentioned by Harris for USA Today showed that 58% of the employees would look for a new job if their boss told them that they need to come in Monday for Friday, 9 to 5. And other surveys show something like 42, 45, 48%, low 50s. So this is a huge retention issue. Very, very big retention issue and this is kind of part of the great resignation. You might have heard of that term where, right now, a lot of people have been working in the same companies. They haven't been changing because of the worries about the pandemic. Right now, people are looking for a shift, for a change, and that's timed with a huge recruitment boom, where a lot of companies that are looking to get into the post-pandemic situation, they're rebuilding, they're looking for many new employees. So you'll get the best employees who are willing to leave and who are going to be competed by for companies. This is going to be one of the biggest things, whether they can work remotely full-time or at least hybrid, depending on the employee. So this is a big, big issue. And it's not simply about their ability to retention, and recruitment. So retention and recruitment are huge issues. It's also their morale and engagement. So you see 75% of the people in various surveys, 75% of the people, 70 to 75, say that they're going to be more happy if they're allowed at least some time from home, and they'll be more engaged, they'll be more loyal, they'll be more likely to recommend the company to their friends, and so on. All of these sorts of things about engagement and morale and productivity that, of course, as we know from extensive research, engaged and happy employees are productive employees. So this is a very, very big orientation that I think is very much at odds with what a number of leaders are thinking about, doing, and talking about.
Definitely. And it's crucial for these leaders and for employers to just listen to the needs of their employees because, like you said, it leads to productivity. And with that being said, what would be the best approach for these businesses and organizations in this transitional period where, more people are being vaccinated and the mandates are being lifted and we're getting back to normal, it looks like. So what is the best approach for getting back in the grove?
I think the most important thing for leaders, so we're talking to leaders right now about leaders, what they're doing, because they will be determining what's going on in their company. So you want to be forward thinking, and you want, as part of your forward thinking, you want to understand the kind of errors we tend to make. So you don't want to be tripped up by these cognitive biases. And these are the dangerous judgment errors that come from how our brain is wired. Employers, leaders, tend to trust their intuition, follow their heart, trust their gut. They've been taught to do that. They've been taught that this is the right way to make decisions. But they have to realize none of their previous experience prepared them for a pandemic. That never happened before. Returning to the office never happened before. So all of your previous experience, all of your previous intuition prepared you for a situation that we're not in right now. And unfortunately, leaders still feel like they want to go back to January 2020. There are a couple of cognitive biases at play here. One is called the status quo bias, where leaders who've spent about 20 years, 30 years experiencing the in-office environment, the camaraderie of speaking with other people. Leaders tend to be extroverted, so they like the presence of other people. They're energized by them. And so they have experienced this 20, 30-year career, and they're successful in that, and they want to go back to what they're successful in, the status quo. Unfortunately, what the status quo bias tells us is that it's often a problem when you're sticking with the status quo, especially in a period of disruption. And what else is this except a period of disruption? The pandemic and the aftermath is a period of huge disruption. That's one thing to think about. The other thing is called the anchoring bias, the other cognitive bias that's really important, where we are anchored to our initial information of ways of learning about something. Now, employers, leaders, been here 20, 30 years, they learned about how to work through in-person, face-to-face interaction. Whereas younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, they're native digital. They learned about technology before they learned about the workplace. And so they're much more comfortable with digital formats. And you're going to have much more struggles with attracting the next generation of leaders and employees if you are going to not have a good, appropriate balance for going hybrid/remote going into the future. In fact, I was talking to one CEO who told me that, I really wanted to do 9 to 5 back to the office, but the problem is, as we're recruiting new leaders, this is a major food chain, so they're recruiting new leaders and they're trying to get them. One of the first questions they ask is, do I have to move? Can I work from home? And they're realizing that if they want to actually recruit good talent, they are not going to be able to have them Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So this is one of those things that you need to realize. They're starting to realize. Of course, you don't want to be in that situation where you're declare that you'll do Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, which is essentially what Google did, and then have to go back on your word. So that's a bad situation. Now, another cognitive bias that's playing a problematic role here is called the confirmation bias, where leaders tend to look for information that confirms their beliefs and ignore information that doesn't. So where I see this playing out is that when leaders are trying to decide on whether to go back to the office full-time, hybrid, remote, whatever, they're talking to their direct reports. So they're talking to their middle managers, the CEOs talking to the VPs are talking to the middle managers, and so on. And so what's happening as a result of that? Well, these are all people who have also succeeded by being in the office. They have, 15, 20-year careers, whereas they're not doing extensive in-depth surveys of their teams. And that is a big, big problem. So they're confirming their biases instead of finding out information that would potentially disconfirm their biases. And so to get more to the question of what leaders should be doing, that's the second half of the white paper that I talked about, the Back to the Office white paper. Leaders should be, first of all, surveying their people and getting responses from people on what they want to do, what kind of workplace do they envision in the future. And I'm very willing to bet that they'll find results on average saying that only a small minority, definitely no more than a third, want to go back to the office full time. That they'll find that a large, that another minority, maybe a third, maybe a little bit over that, will want to be fully remote, and that something like 40 to 50% will want a hybrid schedule. So I think that would be the first step. And we can talk about other steps, but I want to check if you have questions about those cognitive biases and surveying.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. I think we all have these biases, but we're not always aware of what they are. So I'm really glad that you just outlined a bunch of them. And as you're talking about the confirmation bias, we're looking for information that confirms our beliefs. That's where I get into trouble sometimes because I do the same thing. I want to think a certain way. So then I look for those Harvard Business Review articles or the surveys that are going to support my belief. But you're right. It comes down to knowing your people, knowing what your teams want, getting these surveys, and hopefully everyone's telling the truth. Hopefully they're well done surveys, so you're getting accurate feedback. And then learning how to make adjustments, because even though you might want everyone to be back in the office, realizing, hey, for my company, my teams, they're doing very, very well at home, and having them all come back is probably not in their best interest, and I don't want to lose them. So I really love your approach about doing these surveys. How often would you say, to help avoid confirmation bias, that leaders need to be surveying their people to make sure that they're making the right steps going forward?
Well, it depends on what you're focusing on. So when you're talking about returning to the office, you definitely want to do an initial survey on what steps you want to take. And then after you decide on the schedule, and what I strongly recommend is that folks go with a hybrid schedule with options, remote only options for workers who really want them and who can do their job well remotely. So the best approach, when you look at the best practices on the most successful companies transitioning to the new normal, what you want to do is not have the top leadership decide on whether they want to happen. Just have the top leadership give broad guidelines, say that, hey, we're going to do a remote schedule, 1 to 3 days a week on average. And some people, if they want to do fully remotely and they can do their job well fully remotely, we'll let them do fully remotely. And this is the approach taken by a number of companies. So for example, Nationwide Insurance. We're not simply talking about Facebook and Amazon, which definitely have that approach, Dropbox, but a number of large companies, traditional companies, like Novartis, like I mentioned, like Nationwide Insurance. It's a company established in 1926, right? Major insurance company. And I was just talking to a contact there who said that 75% of his division decided to go fully remote.
Oh, wow.
So that's fully remote for Nationwide. And this is much of the division is based in Columbus, Ohio, which is their headquarters. So they definitely have room to return to the office if they want. So this is Nationwide. There are a number of other companies, Target, which is doing this, Bayer, which is doing this, which are deciding to go mainly hybrid with fully remote options for 10 to 30% of their workforce and more if they want. So what you want to do is you want to not have individual employees simply say, this is what I'll do, but you want to have team leaders of lower level supervisors. So the ones who manage the rank and file employees to talk to their teams and decide what they want to do. Mostly, they're going to decide that they want the hybrid schedule, not the fully remote schedule, although some teams will decide to do fully remote. But most teams will want to do a hybrid schedule of 1 to 3 days per week. And so then you want the team, once the teams decide, okay, this is kind of, we want to be coming in 1 to 3 days a week, and there's various dynamics, and we can talk about later about how to do that effectively. But back to the question of surveying, what you want to do after the decision is made, then you want to send out a survey to everyone and say, how happy, how satisfied do you feel with the arrangement that your team leader proposed? What kind of shifts might be made. So you want to do a survey at that stage, then a survey before the implementation itself. And then once you're implementing, you want to be surveying folks every month for the first 6 months to see how things are working out for them. And then, of course, making shifts based on that. And then you can move to once a quarter and for another year. And then after that, it should be pretty clear and established. All issues with return to the office, so specifically surveying about returning to the office, should be clarified.
Do you see as teams begin to go back to the office and decide on like the hybrid schedule that works best for them, do you see their activities at the office are going to be a little bit different than they were before? Can you talk about like what you see is like when they do go to the office? Because obviously a lot of us are working fine at home. We can be very productive based on our work and our job functions. So when I'm thinking about going back to work, I'm thinking it's not to go sit behind a computer to go do work. I'd rather be like meeting and brainstorming.
That's right. Yep. So that's what the workspace of the future looks like. So the companies, I worked with 12 companies, now 13 companies by now, on changing their cost of 12 companies by the time I wrote the white paper, another one right now, by changing their dynamics of their company, what they're actually going to do. In the office, they will be doing overwhelmingly collaborative activities. And so when I'm saying come in 1 to 3 days a week, that depends on how much collaboration and brainstorming you do. So if you are, let's say, somebody who needs to do, and of course there are some other things that you need to do in the office. So some researchers who need to be in the lab, will spend some time there. That's not a question. But we're talking what most back-end office workers do. If they need to do more collaborative stuff with their team members, they would come in more often. If they need to do less collaborative stuff, they would come in maybe once a week just to have those meetings, coordinate, stay on the same page, and so on. It doesn't need to be a whole day. It can be like half a day or something like that. So what you're going to be doing in the office of the future is, the future is now, is much more collaboration, much less individual work. So the companies, to all of them with whom I'm working, they're reshaping their office space. And this is something that's important to think about before you bring your people back to the office, or if you're already starting to, I strongly recommend that you think about whether you may want to hold off on that, not bring everyone back, because you really want to reshape your office space for the work of the future. Your office space will need to be much more oriented toward collaboration, much more conference rooms and lounges. So conference rooms where people can talk more formally, lounges where they can talk more informally, brainstorm, meet each other, stuff like that. Much less individual workspaces. So their companies are changing from having individual workspaces to hot desking for people who do want to come to work, for the smaller minority who want to come to work and use that essentially as an office space, because some people don't have comfortable office space. There's 25% or so, 20-25% who do want to come into the office full time, even when their team is not there. But the rest, they want to come in 1 day a week, 2 days a week when the rest of their team members are there to collaborate. And the overwhelming things that they will do is meeting with each other, brainstorming, collaborating. Maybe during a break in the meetings, they'll go to a hot desk and use their laptop to do some individual work. But overwhelmingly, it will be about collaboration. And that's not, it simply involves changing the office space. It also involves training your people, changing the culture, and changing the performance evaluation system. So training your people, let's think about that. What does that mean? Your people are used to working right now. Previously, they used to work all the time in the office, pretty much. Now they work all the time from home. They did all of their activities in the same place. Right now, that will be different. Right now, that they will separate their activities, where they will be doing collaborative activities in the office and individual activities at home. So their organization, their workflow, their productivity will be quite different than it was before. And they're not used to it. They're not prepared for it. There will be a lot of hiccups and a lot of problems if they're not trained to deal with that. And they will feel quite a bit of frustration and resentment because their work is not nearly as smooth as it could be. So they need to be prepared and trained to deal well with doing some activities in the office that are more collaborative and doing some activities at home. Right now, when you're doing hybrid schedule, it's much, much more important that you come prepared to a meeting rather than, when you're doing 9 to 5 and you can catch up on things, because you have much more limited amount of time to do meetings and to do collaborations with people. So preparation is more important. There needs to be more work done between meetings, more individual work, more preparatory work done at home and so on. So that's a matter of training. Folks need to be trained on this. They also need to be trained on how to communicate and collaborate effectively in virtual/hybrid settings. How do you communicate effectively when there's 7 people in the room and 3 people on Zoom? That's a challenging communication situation where if you're not trained, the people on Zoom will be second-class citizens. And that's not great. So they train your people effectively on how to communicate effectively virtually and in person with hybrid settings and collaborate effectively. So those are all important areas of training. And again, there's performance evaluation and as well as adapting your culture that I can talk about. But I want to see if you have any questions on training and reshaping.
Yeah, you brought up so many great points. And Destiny, I'm just like taking notes here. Because what you just said about training that needs to be done to make us effective workers in these hybrid environments where some people are in the office, some of your team are going to be at home, and how do you make a good meeting with everyone? Because right now when we're working remotely, we're all kind of equal. We're all have our own little video box. It's but I've been in those meetings, pre-COVID, where some members are on video and some people are in the room. And I always feel like we have better dialogue and collaboration, whoever's in the room, because we can see each other, we can see the facial reactions, social cues, and people who are on video, maybe we're not paying as close attention, staring at them. And that makes it very awkward and very hard to build collaboration. So I was wondering what suggestions you would have for those teams that are going to be moving forward working like that.
What you want to do when you're doing virtual training, for that specific situation, what you want to do is have separate training for people who are facilitating the meeting and separate training for, of course, members and participants. Participants, they need to be paying more attention to people who are on video than they intuitively feel like they should, because those people are otherwise going to be left out. They're going to be second-class citizens. And there needs to be a very clear signal for what they want to speak. Zoom has a raised hand signal or something like that. There are various other ways to signal. And their signal needs to be paid attention to much more than the signals of people in the room, because in the room, you can see people's body language. You can see when somebody wants to talk. You can see when somebody wants to make a point. But you can't do that in a hybrid meeting very well at all. So that's a big problem. And so paying attention to them and then giving them more opportunities to speak by individuals, the facilitator, the one who leading the meeting, needs to specifically give them time to participate. So kind of stop, pause at occasional points, the conversation in the room and say, hey, Mike, you're coming in on a video screen. What would you like to contribute to this conversation? So do it much more often than feels intuitive, because what I've seen often is that when I'm training people on this topic initially is that team leaders who are facilitating these meetings, they kind of forget about the people on Zoom. They're kind of the second-class citizens, and the leader forgets about them because they're engaged in the meeting, in the discussion, and they need to learn to separate themselves somewhat from the discussion and to be an effective facilitator. And being an effective facilitator means looking at who is not being heard from, and especially people on Zoom. So there are a lot of other techniques and tricks that I can talk about, but those are just a couple of examples that I think folks should know about.
Yeah, those are really good examples. I was thinking about how, especially those meetings I've been on where you're not on video, it's a conference call, right? And so you have maybe like 7 people in the room and you're having a dialogue, and then people can sometimes forget there are other people on the call because it's on like a speakerphone.
Yep. Yeah, that's especially hard. I think it's much better. You should really, in the modern era of Zoom, you should really not be doing that. You should have everyone absolutely on video. And that involves some changing to the office space. So what is going to be really important for changes to the office space, and what I've been working on with a number of companies, is to have a large video screen in all conference rooms, and so that you can have not small, tiny squares in laptops, but actually people on video conference that are large, visible, and they're much more clear, so they're more present. So that's something that I strongly recommend.
Definitely. These are fantastic recommendations. And with everything that you've said, and like to contribute to this shift that we are going through in everyone's work environment, what are the benefits that you would say to leaders of organizations to integrate this type of collaborative hybrid model?
I think the most important things are some of the things circling back to the beginning from what we're seeing in the surveys. You would have quite a bit higher retention, which is incredibly important in this time of the great resignation and the great hiring surge. You would have much better recruitment of much more talented people, because the people who can afford to set their terms and say, I'm going to be working remotely only, they tend to be the best people. They tend to be people who have more skills and abilities, or who would say, I don't want to come into the office more than once a week or something like that. Those are the people who will have more talent, more skills, who don't want to move from their current environment and so on. So that's going to be really important. Then you will have quite a bit more productivity. When we're looking at actual productivity figures, we see that people are anywhere from 10 to 14% more productive when they work from home on their individual tasks. We're not talking about collaborative team tasks, but on their individual tasks, they're 10 to 14% of the time more productive, which makes sense because, you don't need to do a commute, right? So you're not spending your time on a commute. You're not spending your time walking into the office, going through security, all of that stuff, and then going back, all of those sorts of things which are distracting you in the office. Also, you can work much more in accordance with your energy levels. So research has shown that our own personal individual energy levels differ throughout the day. And throughout the day, we have more energy for certain things, less energy for other things. When you're working from home, you are much more capable of doing those sorts of things during the day. So that's something that's really important for people to have more energy, and therefore they will be more productive. They will not simply be more productive, but they will be more engaged. They will have higher morale. So that has been shown by surveys. People really want working from home, want remote work. That will make them significantly more happy and have higher morale. Also, it will decrease burnout and increase work-life balance. We see that on surveys, people are responding that working from home compared to coming in to work in the office, especially if you are doing 9 to 5, they would have much less work-life balance and much more stress. And so you'll have people burning out, you'll have people taking more sick days, they're having more problems. So you'll have much more burnout, much more problems if you're forcing people to come to the office 9 to 5, rather than having this model of hybrid with some fully remote options. So those, I think, would be the benefits that we're talking about. Now, an additional area of benefits comes from diversity inclusion. When we look at how many people want to work remotely, we're seeing that Black workers, Hispanic workers, and so on want to work remotely at a much higher rate. So if you're seeing that, let's say, 20% of white workers want to come to the office 9 to 5, then for a similar question for Black workers, you're seeing only 3% of them want to come to the office 9 to 5. So 3%. That's, a huge difference. And that comes from what Black workers and Hispanic workers and so on describe as the kind of typical daily microaggressions, discriminations, feelings of discomfort that they feel in the office from some of their white colleagues, far from all of them, but some of them. And so that is something that is going to help your diversity and inclusion goals if you have much more of a hybrid model with full-time remote work options.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I never even considered that being a factor until you brought it up just now. Around the US, there's so many different opportunities for, diversity to increase. And then with being able to work from home and being comfortable in your own space, like they're able to work their best. And there's just so many benefits to adopting this new model that you're proposing here. So I just wanted to commend that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, so there's going to be some companies listening in, some leaders coming in, listening to this conversation, going, "Okay, I'm doing all this, Dr. Gleb. Like, we have the technology, we already have the video screens in every single conference room. We've already given and told employees that they can work hybrid, they can come in as they want to. So for those companies that have already kind of said, yes, we're going to move towards this hybrid model, what are some of the maybe challenges ahead, even if they have the technology, even if they have the hybrid calendar already set up? What are some things they need to be thinking about for the future of work?
So I mentioned the training. I've seen very few companies that are doing hybrid that are actually doing training on how to work on effectively hybrid and how to do effective virtual/hybrid communication and virtual/hybrid collaboration. So we talked about that. I'm not going to repeat it, but that's something that I've seen very few companies doing effectively. There are two more big areas that companies want to be thinking about. One is how to adapt their performance evaluation system, and another is how to adapt their culture more broadly. For performance evaluation, it's still the case that very many managers determine their performance rating by how long somebody is in the office or how long somebody is logged into Microsoft Teams or Slack or what have you. That is a problem. It's been a problem before the pandemic because the best, of course, performance evaluation is task-based, not time spent-based. But it's especially a big problem right now because, of course, that forces a race to the bottom where people are logged into Microsoft Teams or Slack for longer than they should be, than they need to be. And this is, by the way, something that both Slack and Microsoft Teams are reporting from the surveys that they did. Both Slack and Microsoft are reporting that people are logged in much more than they were before and really quite a bit over their should be 40 hours per week or something like that. So that's a big problem where that's causing burnout, kind of a race to the bottom. You don't want to do that. You don't want to reward people for working longer. You want to focus your performance and evaluation instead on their tasks accomplished. And in order to do that, you should not have a once a year or even once a quarter annual, quarterly performance evaluation. You need instead the best practice for task-based evaluation, which all companies should be moving forward to, the ones who are adopting hybrid/remote models. Even hybrid, even if you don't have any more remote workers, even if you only have a hybrid, which I recommend some remote options, but you want to be doing instead a weekly evaluation that's much smaller than that quarterly huge performance review. And that weekly evaluation would just be a report where somebody says, here are my top 5 priorities that I've been working on this week. here are my accomplishments in them, here are my challenges, here's what I plan to do to work on next week, and here's how I would evaluate my self for this week, so self-evaluation. Then that would be sent to their direct report, to their supervisor, and the supervisor would then look that over and then have a 15 to 30-minute meeting each week with the employee and say, hey, here's my suggestions, feedback on your accomplishments, your plans for the week. Then they would determine together whether the self-evaluation is accurate, and I recommend doing that on a scale of 0 to 4 for ease of sake, but you can use other scales. And then they would determine that, and that evaluation that they would be finally determined where the boss would have the final say would then be fed into a promotion and evaluation system, which would then have a quarterly annual kind of component to it. But that performance evaluation system, so that is a much, much more effective system for task-based evaluation. It allows that connection, which is really going to be important, and that shifts us into the culture aspect, connection between the employee and their supervisor with a 15 to 30-minute meeting each week. It's not simply about the report. It's also about how they're doing, their work-life balance, what's going on, their connections with other team members, maybe some of their professional development goals, some of their career development goals, all of that sort of stuff. So that is really important to do, that performance evaluation piece. And now transitioning into the culture. People who spend their time much more in hybrid will be less connected naturally to their team members. So you need to create more opportunities to connect with each other. That's going to be really important. So one is connection to the supervisor, with a direct report to the supervisor. So that's going to be really important. And the 15 to 30 minute per week meeting is going to really help with that interaction. That's going to be very helpful. So that's going to be really important. Now, for connecting to your team members, there are a number of things that can be done. One of those things is when you're in the office, of course, so you're doing some socializing, having some fun time, doing away with Zoom happy hours. Those do not work very well. Doing some happy hours in person, all of that sort of stuff. So making sure that you, every week when you're in the office, do some team building activities. Not simply do the work meeting, but do some team building activities. So that's kind of one component. Another component is for connection, to do digital co-working on the days that you're not in the office. What's digital co-working? That means that everyone, for at least an hour a day, they tune into a video conference call, all the members of a team, and they do their individual work with their speakers on, but their microphones off. Their video is optional. If you want to do it, you don't want to do it. And then if you want to ask a question or chat about something, you turn your microphone on, and then chat and then turn your microphone off. So you're not distracting your team members by your typing or something. And that is a very good way for people to co-work together, to collaborate together. They can start the co-working session by sharing what they intend to work on during the co-working session, and end it by sharing what they worked on and their accomplishments. And they can chat to each other, ask clarifying questions during the co-working session. That's a really good way of bonding for people and connecting for people. So I encourage that as a strategy for connection. There are a number of other strategies I described in the white paper. I can go into them, but I want to check if you have questions on what I've described so far.
Yeah, I have a couple comments. And yes, I could happily say what you said about the integrating the co-working method. We happily do that here at Experian, and it works really well for me because I'm able to just stay engaged, although I am states away from my coworkers. It's a very good strategy to use, to facilitate a productive work environment from home. So that's fantastic. And the whole thing that you were saying about having evaluations every week, like short evaluations, so many companies could leverage that, and it could even be used to determine who's going to come in, who's going to, who's better at having this hybrid situation as a full-time role, or who would just be better in the office, so that there's just so many ways to leverage weekly evaluations. Like, that is just phenomenal.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great technique, Destiny, and it's a very useful one for a number of tools. Like you said, who determining who is better in the office, who can do their work fully remotely, who does their work best hybrid, but also if you need help with a certain task, you don't wait until the annual evaluation. If you need kind of professional development in a certain area, if there's some tension brewing, or if you are succeeding unexpectedly in a certain task and you want to maybe have more tasks or shift to a different area, that's also a wonderful opportunity to do it. So there's both, not simply problems, but also opportunities that you can leverage with this system.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to just go into just what's going on with COVID-19 and how it's impacted work. And you're mentioning that this hybrid method could be definitely the future of work. Everything is changing now. And how do you think that companies should be planning for, future health crises based on what we've observed with COVID-19, and how will the future of work change based on that?
So I think having that hybrid schedule with fully remote options will definitely help from a health crisis perspective. Obviously, if you don't have your team working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 in the office, but if you have them coming in, once a week, twice a week with a bunch of people working full-time remotely, then that helps mitigate a lot of risks around health crises, because you can much more easily then shift into full-time remote space. So that's a great way of ameliorating health risks. In general, for health crises, you want to be looking ahead, and you want to be aware that obviously we're much more aware that pandemics are possible, and that's something to be thinking about. And we have gotten very, very lucky with this pandemic, with this new mRNA technology that produced a highly effective vaccine so quickly. So that's really great. That's really wonderful. We might not get so lucky with future pandemics. So that is something for us to be aware of, something for us to think about, that we're not guaranteed that future pandemics would be something that we can be as effective about. I mean, imagine if we had something like, AIDS that was spread through respiratory contact instead of the way it's spread. It would be pretty terrible. And we haven't had a vaccine for AIDS despite trying for many decades. So this is an example of something that could be very dangerous and damaging. So you want to be prepared to shift your company at any moment to full-time remote work for health crises, but also the nice thing is it would protect you from many other crises, from hurricanes, from various damages, from various sorts of physical crises, things that would inhibit your ability, earthquakes, inhibit your ability to come to the office. So that's another huge benefit that you're seeing. Now, a challenge that companies want to be thinking about from a risk management perspective is that their workspace now is not simply their corporate office, which, by the way, many companies are shrinking, getting rid of a lot of office space, which is good for their bottom lines. This is another benefit of the hybrid remote model. So shrinking your office space. But your office space, your workspace, is now also in the home of your employee. So you want to be aware that your risk profile from a risk management perspective, talking about health risks, but also all sorts of other risks. If you have a bunch of your employees living in Florida and there's a hurricane and it knocks out their power and so on, then how are you going to back them up? What's going to happen with them? So you want to be aware of where your employees are and what their risk profiles is. So a company's risk profile is much less concentrated, which is great, but it's also more diffuse. So it can have more small hits rather than one large hit. And you definitely want to be in a place where you take more small hits rather than one large hit. But you're going to, for those small hits, you can ameliorate the situation by helping your employees future-proof their homes, their plans, their workplaces. So making sure that your employees, flood-proof their house, do a lot of things that help them stay safe in their home, where their workspaces, which you're managing. And that involves you helping fund their risk mitigation strategies. So funding the risk mitigation strategies is very helpful and very important. I talk also in the white paper about simply funding good internet connections for them. Many people are using the basic standard internet, and that drops out, especially in more intense interactions. That's not great. You want to provide them with technology. You want to think about their ergonomic situation. We work for a year-ish right now in the home, and companies mostly have not been, maybe something like 20 to 25% of companies have been paying for their employees to have good equipment, good furniture. And that is not a great idea. Going forward, your employees will be permanently working from home. You want to make sure that they're healthy, that they don't have to take sick days because they're having problems with, their fingers typing. So, I've gotten a standing desk for the last 10 years, and it's been very helpful for me, but many people don't. So it's something to think about. And various other things that are effective ergonomic interventions. So you have a risk profile from a personal health perspective, you have a risk profile from a technology perspective, and you have a risk profile from broader natural disasters and other problems that can strike your employees. So if you want to be thinking about mitigating natural disaster risks, you want to be evaluating, are some of your employees, if you have a lot of employees in California, which many companies do, or in Florida, or whatever. In California, you have strong wildfire risks. In Florida, you have strong hurricane risks, and so on. There are a number of risks that are going on. So what you may be able to do is, if, let's say, you have 10% of your employees in Florida, maybe you can make sure that you have cross-training for those employees for people who are not in Florida and who are not as likely to get hit by a hurricane that hits Florida. The same thing for people in California for wildfires, to have cross-training and backups for them. So thinking about the geographic location of your employees, what risks they're exposed to, and how you as a company can mitigate those risks. And again, both from a broader natural disaster, other sorts of disasters perspective, and health problems with this furniture and so on, comfort issues, as well as good technology, video camera, mic, laptop, all of that sort of stuff, broadband.
This is absolutely fantastic. And Dr. Gleb, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're always super insightful, and I love how you approach ways that businesses can mitigate risk. And you think about all aspects from emotional well-being to geography to what you just mentioned about storms and other future pandemics potentially. So I love how you think about all those different things. And at the beginning of the podcast, you addressed all the different biases that we all have and we need to be thinking about and be very much aware about. For those listening in who have been listening to you and sharing your insights from this white paper, where can they learn more about your work and also this latest white paper?
They can check out my work on disasteravoidanceexperts.com. That's my website. It has my blogs, my podcasts, my videocasts, white papers, books, of course, online courses, manuals, and so on. Especially check out disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe for a free 8 video-based module course on making the wisest decisions and addressing all of these sorts of risks in all areas, not simply returning to the office in the pandemic. So that's disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. Now, if you want to get the white paper, simply email me. That's the easiest way at Gleb, Gleb, at disasteravoidanceexperts.com and tell me that you heard me on Data Talk, and I'll be glad to send you the white paper. So again, email me, tell me you heard me on Data Talk, I'll send you the white paper. It's Gleb, Gleb, at disasteravoidanceexperts.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike and Destiny.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Data Talk podcast. We share new shows every week, and you can find the full catalog of previous episodes, including YouTube videos, on our Experian news blog. You can get access to the full catalog by going to experian.com/datatalk. And we always love hearing from our community, so if you have any comments or suggestions for future shows or guests you'd like to hear from, please let us know. You can leave a comment on iTunes, or you can reach out to us on Twitter at Experian Data Lab. You can also email me directly. My email is michael.delgado@experian.com. Take care, and we'll chat next week.